what I wanted to first share is like when you are in this up and up, and like you're growing, you're evolving, you are improving as a person. And then you have maybe moments where your emotions are, you're not feeling happy, or you're maybe noticing old patterns creeping up. The first thing is to notice the predominant emotion you're feeling. Like, what is that actual emotion coming up as? What is that emotion telling you? What are the thoughts that you're thinking that have got you back to the place that you're at? But almost like you're a researcher, what is working with what I'm doing? What is not working? And what do I want to do differently? You're listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, episode number 87, with your host, Shiro Bergbauer. Hey mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. Today on the podcast, what I would like to talk about is the process of personal growth and personal development and what it actually looks like. What I want to share with you is my own insights and with working with my coaching clients on the fact that it's not a linear trajectory. And I think sometimes we think that it should be. And I just think that that is important for us to discuss. So I want to share a quote from Young Pueblo's book, Clarity and Connection. And he says, "The subconscious, where most of our emotional history is stored, holds much that still needs to be released. We are in a situation where our conscious thought patterns may have changed for the better, but our subconscious thoughts, the ones that sometimes spontaneously emerge, are still filled with the heaviness and harshness of old ways. This is not to say that we should force ourselves to think a certain way or push down certain thoughts. We should just be aware that this lack of a linear trajectory is a natural part of the healing process, and instead focus on cultivating the habits and practices that are helping us transform. The thing about opening yourself up to healing and growth is that once some issues melt away, deeper layers will have the space they need to come up for observation and release. There is much more accumulated in the subconscious than we initially comprehend. This is why letting go is a long-term commitment. It's possible to get to a much happier place while still working on processing and undoing old patterns." End quote. So this podcast was inspired by a conversation I had with one of my coaching clients, and we were talking about her growth and celebrating and being in awareness of what's changed in her life. And when she came on the call, she was kind of feeling some uncomfortable emotions, and she offered me this thought that she felt like, her growth and her personal growth should kind of be going up, 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 up. The funny thing is, the same week I had a client also kind of express that same sentiment, being frustrated about maybe taking several steps back. So it got me thinking, where do we come up with this idea that when we start to evolve and when we start to change, it's on the up. And when we notice that maybe we're making a few missteps or making a few mistakes along the way, that we worry that something's gone wrong. And what I want to say first is that is actually a sign that we're growing, is if we can even notice that, I took a few steps back, and we're not subconsciously or unconsciously making steps without any idea of where we're going. It's like if you were going hiking and you notice, I think I'm a little lost, or, I'm not where I started or where I wanted to go. That awareness is an example of how we are actually growing, right? And so one of the examples that I shared with my clients this week was to imagine, which by the way, I have never climbed a mountain. I've never been hiking, but to imagine that you're climbing a mountain. And a little backstory is a couple of years back, my best friend told me that she and her coworkers were going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And I go, oh, when are you going? And she gives me the dates. And she's like, yeah, we're going to do it in 4 days. And I was like, now, I've never climbed a mountain, but what I've heard is that you need a minimum of 6 days to climb Kilimanjaro. And she was like, no, we're just going to go and we're going to go hike. And I'm like, oh, are these people like expert hikers? Like, what is the deal? And I was like, I'm not one to like, discourage you from going on this trip, but I think you guys need to like study a little more because it sounds to me like you need more than a few days. And so we started talking about climbing Kilimanjaro and we were Googling all the things. And I only knew about that experience because one of my friends, Deb, had climbed Kilimanjaro and she had told me the story about like acclimatizing and what you need and how one of her friends got really, really sick on the mountain. And so as a good friend, I was just looking out for my bestie and I was like, before you go, just like do the research. And so when you're climbing Kilimanjaro, you have to know how you acclimatize to the low oxygen in the air. So you have to walk long distances, and we all know you need oxygen to be able to function. And you have to really acclimatize while you're climbing the mountain. So altitude training is super, super important. And so you start, like there are multiple routes on the mountain, and you obviously should use a guide, and you go up the mountain, and there's some routes. So you go up, if you use the Makame route, it's also known as the whiskey route, you need 7 days to go up the mountain. So what you do is you climb, you go up a little bit, you come back down at night, you go back to base camp basically, then you go up again. So first, like even before, you should have like 2 days prior to your summit in order to like optimize. And then you walk high and sleep low. So you go up, you come back down. And it's a very, like, this route actually is very well, like, utilized by many people. So, one day you climb, the altitude changes from 1,800 meters to 3,000 meters, and it's 11 kilometers. And so the distance is 11 kilometers, 5 to 7 hours, and then you come back down. And then you go up again, you go 9 kilometers, and then you come back down. And then you go up 12 kilometers, and then you come back down. Anyway, it's a whole like going up, coming back down, and like resettling, going back up. And then at the very end, you get to the peak and, you plant your flag or whatever. But the reason I wanted to share this example is to illustrate the fact that like you don't climb a mountain and you just like go all the way to the top, right? So if you think about like a mountain as like your self-actualization, it takes more than like going from 0 to however many meters at the top of the mountain. Like you don't do that. You make some steps up, you kind of see how you like the atmosphere there, then you come back down, then you go up. Like, so nothing's gone wrong if your summit of your highest self includes some return back to base camp sometimes. Like nothing's gone wrong. What I wanted to first share is like when you are in this like, up and up, like you're growing, you're evolving, you are improving as a person. And then you have maybe moments where your emotions are, you're not feeling happy or you're maybe noticing old patterns creeping up. The first thing is to like notice the predominant emotion you're feeling. Like what is that actual emotion coming up as? What is that emotion telling you? What are the thoughts that you're thinking that have got you back to the place that you're at? From a place of curiosity, like almost like you're a researcher. And towards the end, I'm going to talk about evaluating. But like almost like you're a researcher, like what is working with what I'm doing? What is not working? And what do I want to do differently? Evaluating that. I wanted to offer you some thoughts that your brain will offer you when you're struggling and you're like down emotionally that may make you think that something terrible has happened. And that's just what your brain does. Like our brain's job is to perceive danger and warn us of the danger, even though sometimes it's not real danger. So your brain's just doing its job, telling you there's a threat ahead or something terrible is happening. And your job as your prefrontal cortex is to tune in, not argue with your brain, but like tune in and be like, why is my brain saying that? It's like, what is true about what the brain is saying and what's not true? And instead of arguing with your brain, just going, oh, this is actually what's happening. So what I wanted to share with you is an example of like if you're struggling, let's say you're struggling in your marriage or your relationships are breaking down or you're struggling at work, your business is not going well, and the number one tendency for you is to isolate. So it can be where like you're a people person, you socialize with people, and then you like are so in your emotions that you're like, I'm just going to isolate. And before I go there, I want to say that I think it's important when your brain and your energy points you to inward retrospection, like introspection, listening to that and honoring that in a way that serves you. So when your brain says, let's stay in bed, let's never get out of bed, things are terrible out there, just question it a little bit. Is it serving us to is it asking us to rest or is it asking us to hide? Because there's a big difference between offering your body the rest that it maybe needs and offering your brain the mental space and capacity that it needs in order to settle into negative emotions or seek comfort in a healthy way without it being obviously a dopamine hit and just resting. So one of the things I wanted to share, I had this conversation with a client and she was feeling some uncomfortable emotions, and her brain was offering her that she shouldn't call her friend and that she was being a burden. And so when we were talking about it, I wanted to help her explore why her brain was telling her this. And from a place of oh, that's normal. Of course my brain would tell me this, if I'm sad or if I'm not showing up as bubbly and happy, I should probably not tell anybody what I'm going through because I don't want to be a burden. And it sounds very oh yeah, that's right. I don't want to be a burden. And so what I kind of reflected with her is if your friend came to you with a situation, would the first thought be this person is being a burden? And the surprising answer was no. So why does our brain tell us we're being a burden when we're the ones struggling? Because our brains want us to not quote unquote bother other people. They don't have to know. And part of that, there's a secrecy to that. And it's the fear of judgment and shaming, which means that obviously we don't go sharing all the problems with all the people. But the human experience is such that we connect with other people. So your brain may also offer you as you're growing and you're on your path of personal development, oh, you're not achieving anything. People can see right through it. People think you're being you're just reading out of a book and going and saying the things what is it even for? You should just give up and just go back to your old ways. And yeah, nobody cares. Just go back to your old ways. You're fake. And sometimes we listen to it and you're you know what, brain, you're right. I'm just going to just go back to my old ways, be petty, argue with everybody, all the things, instead of being I wonder why my brain is telling me that. Of course, that's the path of least resistance, right? Because the path, imagine if you're climbing the mountain, would you rather stay in the camp and sleep all day if you're feeling tired? Of course, right? So your brain's why would you want to go out in the world and live as your highest self? Well, you could just stay in the hut and sleep and be basic and be baseline and nothing changes. And so, of course, since our brain is trying to conserve energy, our brain's not yay, you're doing the thing, you're making the changes, yay, you. Your brain's this is exhausting. I want rest. Right? Because our primitive brains want to avoid pain, seek pleasure, and conserve energy. So if it takes more energy and emotional bandwidth to show up as our authentic selves, to show up as our highest selves, to really tune in to our feelings, to be who we want to become, and to try to be that person every day, the brain's I need a break. Let's go back to the cave and take a nap, right? So what are the feelings that may come with these thoughts? They can be fear, sadness, anger, and frustration. So it can be I don't want to feel sadness, or I don't want to feel fear, or I don't want to feel anger, or I don't want to feel frustrated. And the more we resist that, it's when we ignore a little baby crying, the more we ignore it, the louder it gets, right? And so we are like, I don't want to feel fear, so I'm just gonna, not do the uncomfortable thing, or I don't want to be sad, so I don't want to have crucial conversations, or I don't want to be angry, so I'm not going to have these conversations with people that might be difficult, or I don't want to be frustrated, so I don't want to communicate with my partner what my needs are. So we end up self-editing because of these uncomfortable emotions. So what I wanted to do in this podcast is offer you an intentional thought that you can choose when your brain offers you you're being a burden, or, oh my gosh, something's gone wrong. I'm backtracking in my progress and my growth. I'm not moving fast enough. Because that's another one. All my clients really are high achievers. And so for them, getting that A, even in coaching, is super crucial. So they're like, wait, why am I not at self-actualization already? I should be there. I'm smart. And I always want to make the distinction, intellectual, intelligence is not the same as emotional intelligence. So it may take you a while to get to that level of personal growth, and nothing has gone wrong. It's okay, right? So how do we then tune into that intentional thought? The thoughts that I wanted to share with you are thoughts that I learned from the work of Christine Neff, which have a lot to do with self-compassion. So if you are going through some difficult moments, I want to offer you these thoughts and some variations of them so that you can really tune in to where you are and be accepting of it. So one of the equations that I learned from Christine Neff is that suffering is equals to pain times resistance. So when we suffer and we argue against reality, the resistance, we dial the notch up, right? So sometimes we can't change the pain because maybe it's a circumstance and we really can't change that. So what we can change is our thoughts, which have to do with resistance. So when we dial that resistance dial down, what do we notice is happening? The first step of lowering resistance is just actually noticing, being in awareness, right? The highest level of the opposite of resistance is acceptance, but it has to start with us noticing and being in awareness, oh, what am I feeling? What is happening? What are the thoughts that I'm thinking? Where am I feeling these emotions in my body? What is happening? What am I thinking about the circumstance that's creating me to have this feeling that I'm having right now? Where do I feel this feeling? What are the precursors to the feeling? What is the very thought that happens before I feel the feeling? What fuels the feeling? What am I doing? Am I numbing the feeling by maybe over drinking, overeating, overspending? Being in awareness, noticing, just paying attention to what is happening until we ultimately get to awareness and acceptance. And then we've lowered the resistance so much that we now lower the equation of suffering. So the 4 thoughts in order to show up in self-compassion that I want to share are, number 1, this is a moment of suffering. Number 2, suffering is a part of life. Number 3, may I be kind to myself in this moment. Number 4, may I give myself the compassion I need. So those might seem very woo-woo, so I'm going to give you some other variations of the same sentences. So for the first one, which is this is a moment of suffering, it could really just saying to yourself out loud, I'm having a really hard time right now. Or it's really painful for me to feel the way I'm feeling right now. The second one, suffering is a part of life, it can just be telling yourself, oh, this is part of being human. This is part of the human experience. Everybody feels this way sometimes. We all go through a variation of these uncomfortable emotions at one point or the other. I think sometimes, especially when we're feeling anxiety or fear or shame or sadness, we're we are the only ones on the planet who have experienced this emotion, or we will never experience the comfortable emotions ever again. So reminding ourselves of the common humanity, oh, people go through this a lot, and I'm people, and I'm resilient. How do you practice the thought of being kind to yourself? It could be just saying to yourself, I want to be gentle and understanding with myself, or I want to hold my pain with tenderness. I would hold a newborn baby that's super frail. How can I be so tender to myself, that version of me that needs nurturing care? For the 4th sentence, reminding yourself that you are worthy of receiving self-compassion, And even asking of yourself, like, I want to try to be as compassionate to myself as possible. Knowing your bandwidth for your extent to which you can practice compassion. That may help you just like tune into what's happening right now and decide for yourself, oh, I want to be kind to myself. Like, I'm feeling really, really sad. Can I hold up these emotions? One of the things that I wanted to share from my own personal experience is that sometimes when we're feeling extremely uncomfortable emotions, like sadness, for example, it can be very, very easy for us to feel like this is the only emotion I can feel right now. Even the neutral ones are not available to me. And one thing that I want to give you as a tip is to be aware of your resources when you are heavily in negative or uncomfortable emotions, is to remind yourself, like, what are the resources that I have? And so for me, what I usually do is I keep a picture of my daughter on my screensaver on my phone. And what I do, because I always have my phone, is I'll pick up my phone and I'll just look at a picture of Bella. And 99.99% of the time, it'll bring a positive thought about her. It will bring a smile to my face. It will make me think about her hugs and the nice things that she says and the sweet notes that she leaves me. And then I may feel like a glimpse of joy in that moment. And that is a way to remind myself that, oh, I can hold up sadness and joy at the same time. Like, I can be sad, but I also have the capacity for happiness. So it's like a reminder to my brain, like, oh, we could do both. We don't have to feel extreme sadness. Joy is available to us in the little things. And sometimes that may look like having the awareness in the present moment of where am I? Who am I in space? So when I was a little girl, I remember I would close my eyes and I would just like, it was blank, but I could see me like from the inside. And I would imagine myself like being in this vacuum. And it always brought me back to where I was in the present moment, because it was like nothing else was happening except the me that's here. So if you find yourself like getting overwhelmed by emotion and maybe you're in a public place and you don't know what to do, one of the things you can try out is to like bring yourself back to the present moment, maybe by just deciding to notice the ground below your feet, or if you're sitting on a chair, like what is holding me up right now? Where am I in space and time right now? And being like fully present for a few seconds at a time, just to be like, oh, I'm here. I'm part of the big picture of the universe, and I'm here right now in the now. And I just want to worry about the now for like 30 seconds. And just be present. Because I think sometimes we overcomplicate being present and mindfulness and meditation. And the tactile aspect of it is just like to remind us, like in space, this is the amount of space I occupy. Like even maybe holding your hand, like realizing, oh, this is a part of me that's not directly like, my fingers are not like connected to my neck, but I can use my fingers to feel my neck, like being truly in the now. So if you are, trying to like make changes in your life and you're like, it's not moving fast enough, I just want you to like be in awareness and be willing to practice self-compassion. The other thing that I want you to maybe pay attention to is when you find yourself maybe not forgiving yourself or being so hard on yourself, when can you recognize the causes on the conditions that have caused you to act the way that you have from a very neutral, curious, compassionate place? Because our thoughts, our emotions, and behaviors are the product of different factors, and some of them are outside our control for the most part. So can we help to understand, like, oh, this may be why I did this thing, because I'm human. Like, humans make mistakes. It's part of the human experience, right? And then maybe even ask myself, like, what were the emotions I was feeling when I did that thing? Or what were the factors that precipitated these thoughts for me, the circumstance? What was I feeling? Was I feeling fear? Was I feeling confused? Was I feeling angry? Like, what uncomfortable emotion was I feeling at the time? Was I having a stressful life experience? Or what else was I dealing with? It's like to humanize yourself and the mistakes you may have made. And then when you're like, okay, but I should have stopped. I should have done this. I should have done this. Like, how can you understand the factors that impact your self-control and your willpower, like your emotional maturity, your empathy, your ability to delay gratification? How was it not present in that moment that you still did the thing that maybe you have a better understanding of, like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. But in that moment, I didn't have like the empathy for myself or for other people. And that's why I did the thing. To also be in compassion, like, oh, I'm human. Of course, I made that mistake or decision, but I'm a human being. I'm limited and I'm fallible, and I sometimes act in ways that I shouldn't. Now, can I forgive myself? Right? Doing so is not like giving us permission to go out in the world and do the same exact thing. It's just allowing us to have awareness, like, oh, I'm human, and this is how I've showed up in this way. And can I give myself grace and compassion? So the last thing I wanted to talk about is evaluating. And this is, I want to talk about it in the sense of personal growth. And again, like, you're monitoring your trajectory and where you're going, and knowing that it's not linear. How can you evaluate? So what is the definition of evaluate? So evaluate is a transitive verb that means to determine or fix the value of, or to determine the significance, worth, or condition of something, usually by careful appraisal and study. So the word that I want to take here with us is appraisal. So what should we evaluate? So we can evaluate our own personal growth. So that can be our mental growth, our social growth, our spiritual growth, our emotional growth, or physical growth, like our health goals. So how do we evaluate? The first step of evaluating is really looking at what is working. So it can look very different for different people, but I'm just going to share an example of how I evaluate. So I usually like to evaluate my week in different aspects. So I'll evaluate my week as far as my business. And from that, I will evaluate, like, okay, what worked well this week? So the three components of evaluating are what worked well, what didn't work, and what do I want to do differently next time? Now, in the last episode, I talked about how, like, you decide, you implement, and you fail, and then you decide again. So going through this process and deciding what I want to do differently allows me every week to make some minor tweaks or keep what's working, to change what's not working. But it gives me a consistent way to see, like, oh, this is not working, this is working, this is what I want to do different. So in my business, I may evaluate, like, how am I connecting with my clients? How are my coaching calls going? How did I show up? What's the energy in which I showed up for coaching calls? Am I making offers? Am I creating valuable content? Am I, like, keeping my own, like, business deadlines? Like, am I recording my podcasts on time and meeting my producers' time frames? Like, what are my deliverables? How am I doing that? What is working, right? So for me, for example, I'll just kind of walk you through it. Like, I can say what's working is I outline, like, I plan the podcast outline on Mondays, and my deadline is to have it outlined by Wednesday. My podcast, I want to record it on Thursday or Friday. I really look at the content. I ask myself, like, what is my client wanting from me so that I can explain it to them in a way that, like, makes sense? What are my client's problems? And by client, I mean you, the listener, not just the people who pay to work with me. Like, what are the common threads that my clients, like, what are the problems that my listeners are going through, right? What is a possible solution for them? Am I communicating that succinctly in the podcast? Is it showing up on my outline? Am I holding space for my clients to, like, kind of see themselves? I like this idea that I learned from a business mentor of mine. It's like, my brand is a reflection of me, but it's a mirror for my clients to see themselves in. So how am I putting out work in the world that my clients, which is you, the listener, is looking at it and saying, oh, I see myself in that mirror. This is what I can learn from this content. So I evaluate what's working in my content. I've tried different things, and I always evaluate, like, is it working? Is it working to have, like, my podcast planned out, like, you know, a quarter ahead of time? Is that working? And then I go to what's not working. So, for example, what's not working is, for me, I realized when I would batch content, if I didn't intentionally batch the content, I didn't like the way it came out. So I then evaluated, like, it's not working for me to batch content. So I would rather spend the time thinking about what my clients want to hear, thinking about how I can help them in the podcast, and then intentionally creating one episode every week. Unless maybe I'm going on vacation, then maybe I can batch produce some content, but having awareness of, like, what wasn't working. The third part is, what do I want to do differently? Again, using the idea of what's not working, like, how do I want to, like, show up for my clients? How do I want to create content for my clients? So when you're evaluating, for example, your personal growth, you might look at it and go, okay, what's working is like this week, I self-coach every day. I read a book. I tried to implement something that I learned. That's working. What's not working is I was giving myself a lot of like pressure to do certain things by a certain amount of time. I wasn't being kind to myself. Maybe I caught myself falling back on old patterns and noticing that. And now what do I want to do differently next time? So next week, I want to continue to self-coach, right? Because I'm doing it already. I want to pay closer attention to how I'm communicating with people in my life. I want to pick a topic that I want to work on for the week and then narrow down my focus on that. So evaluating that like really does give you an insight. So you're not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results because not everything works for everyone. So like even for me, like I have a consistent bedtime and I notice that when I'm fluid about it, I feel tired. So when I evaluate, I'm like, okay, you know what's not working is going to bed at haphazard hours of the night. So what I want to do differently is set a fixed bedtime schedule. Or maybe when I'm coaching myself, I'm finding myself getting distracted. So what's not working is not planning when I'm going to self-coach. And instead, next week, what I want to do is actually schedule my self-coaching on my calendar and be intentional about it. So I do it not out of obligation because I want to be there. So when you are evaluating your own growth and your personal development, just be willing to see what's working first. And the part where maybe you feel like you're taking a few steps back, tune in and evaluate what's not working. Are you maybe, for example, hanging out with people who maybe aren't getting you closer to you being your highest self? What do you want to do differently? Maybe creating better boundaries, right? Maybe changing the conversations you're having. Maybe tuning into what kind of conversations are you having? How do you catch yourself maybe getting involved in conversations that you're trying to change out of? So like, for example, if you find yourself in a pattern of hanging out with people who maybe get very petty or engaged in talking about other people and just deciding, okay, I can hang out with these people, but maybe when that comes up, I'm going to find a distraction or I'm going to change the topic. Evaluating really does help you because it keeps you like checking yourself consistently so that you can keep up leveling the things that are working. Because if you don't evaluate, then you really will never have a clear picture of what's not working. So like another example I'll give you is I noticed for myself, for example, at bedtime with my daughter, what was not working was like not having structure at bedtime. So like just letting things be fluid. I would end up frustrated. She would end up frustrated. But then I had told myself like structure is very rigid and we're going to be uncomfortable. But when I evaluated, I was like, structure actually is what I want to do differently because when I have structure, she knows what to expect next. So like when she brushes her teeth, what happens next? What happens next? Like, and we have a fixed time and we do the thing. And then like I noticed, oh, this is working so much better than like just deciding like, oh my God, we don't have a structure. We don't want to be rigid. Like this actually works better for us. So for your own personal growth, I want you to just notice like what is working. Is it getting coached? Is it listening to podcasts? Is it reading the books? Okay, then going to like what's not working. What's not working might be maybe I'm reading 3 books at the same time and I'm getting confused about what to implement and deciding what to do differently is, okay, what about if I try one book at a time, implement a thing from this book and then move on to the next book? Am I utilizing the resources that I have? Am I reaching out to the people who can support me? Or am I kind of compartmentalizing myself in this like little silo and not asking for help? Can I do differently by asking for help? Can I reach out? I wanted to like kind of cover evaluating with the same concept of personal growth not being linear because I think that helps you see when we're evaluating, we're all also seeing like what's not working. So then we know, like, if we're making steps backwards, we're not beating ourselves up for making steps backwards. We're solving for how not to do that. We're solving for how to show up differently, what to do better. And what I want to offer you is, even if you notice that you're taking some steps back, nothing's gone wrong. It's the human experience. Like, if we were all supposed to be perfect, we wouldn't be functioning as normal humans. And I think when we overcomplicate our own personal growth is when we expect perfection out of it. If we practice curiosity, and compassion, right? And if we embrace the gifts of imperfection, which is courage, connection, and compassion, then we can see how it's normal that we go through all these phases, right? Even if you think about like the growth of an animal or a child, right? Like if your child starts walking and they trip, it doesn't mean they'll not get up and walk again. We don't go, oh my God, you tripped, you're never going to walk again. We like hold space for them to get back up and start walking, and then they do the walking. I always tell the story of when my daughter was little, she started speaking very, very early, and it took her the longest time to grow her first 2 teeth. And then when she grew her 2 teeth, I found something else to focus on, which was she's not walking. And what I noticed for myself is it's like every time I set these targets, then I was setting myself up to feel disappointed because I was like, but she's not doing this thing. And long story short, she now has teeth. She walks. Like, it was bound to happen eventually. It just didn't happen in the way I thought it was going to happen. So what if it was okay that your personal growth isn't happening in a linear fashion and you just allowed yourself space to be human? What would change? How would you hold space for yourself? How would you practice self-kindness, knowing full well that taking steps back is 100% part of the process? What would be different? So that's all I have for you today. I'd love to invite you to come work with me with coaching one-on-one. I still have openings available. If you are interested, I want you to go to stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultations or click on the consultations tab on my website, stethoscopestoswaddles.com. Book your free 1-hour consultation, and let's get started working together to up-level your personal growth. It's going to be amazing work that you get to do for yourself, and it's going to create a ripple effect in the world when you show up as the highest version of yourself. So that is my invitation for you to work with me. If this is something you've been considering, this is your sign. Now is the time. So book your consult. I will talk to you next week. Bye. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.